Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duck Bricks. I'm Chris, and now that we are officially part of the LEGO Ambassador Network, it is my pleasure to bring you our first of many early LEGO 2023 reviews. So I actually got this set pretty recently, set number 80045, the Monkey King Ultra Mech. This is a set that will release on January 1st, 2023, but I actually got it for free from the land to review for all of you, and I'm so excited to bring you this early review. This is pretty much the first time that I was actually able to get a LEGO set in the mail directly from LEGO that is months in advance, so that is super cool to see. And what's even cooler is that the Monkey King Ultra Mech is actually a direct successor to the original Monkey King Warrior Mech, which we can see up here, which was one of my favorite Monkey Kid sets when it first released back when the theme first launched. So this has been one of my most anticipated LEGO Monkey King sets ever since it was first kind of revealed at the Chinese Fan Expo. I am incredibly excited to build this all and review it for all of you. And of course, this is not the only Monkey Kid 2023 set we received early, and be sure to stay tuned to the channel because we'll be doing reviews on every single one of the brand new 2023 Monkey Kid sets early for all of you to see, and of course having it all sum up and culminate in a massive wave review for the January 2023 LEGO Monkey Kid sets, of which there are a ton and of which there are quite a few really interesting things to see. Of course, even though this product was given to me by LEGO, these thoughts will be my own. At the time of this recording, I have not built it yet, but be sure that I will have a completely honest and unbiased take on it, and I definitely do want to do a very fair comparison to that original mech, because a lot of people who got the original mech may be wondering, is it worth it to get this? Well, hopefully I'll be able to answer that in this video, because they definitely feel very similar. There are aspects of it that I definitely like better. There are aspects of the other mech that I like better just by kind of looking at things, and I just will have to wait and see. So without further ado, let's just jump right in to the review of 80045 Monkey King Ultra Mech. Just before we get started here, a lot of people ask with these early reviews, what are the new pieces of 2023? Well, unfortunately, to be completely honest, I didn't really notice any new parts that are structural. There are a few new minifigure parts, but the main thing that is new for this entire Monkey Kid 2023 wave are these packs of weapons. So each of these weapons came in its own separate kind of individual pack, kind of similar to the Ninjago Golden weapons for Crystallized, and they have new staff ends for the Monkey King's staff, which is very cool. These are actually all supposed to represent famous weapons in the Monkey King Sun Wukong lore, so very cool. We're getting a whole pack for them. Alright, so right here we have set number 80045 Monkey King Ultra Mech. It will retail for $160 on January 1st, 2023, and will also retail for 140 euros and 120 British pounds, making the currency conversion actually pretty fair for a set like this. Now this is a direct successor to another set that actually came out a few years ago, set number 80012 Monkey King Warrior Mech, which retailed for around $10 less in the US, but also came with some buildings and side vehicles, which of course we will be taking a look at and doing a comparison at the end of this video. Now, I do want to say that while this set was sent to me by the LEGO Ambassador Network, thank you again so much for doing that, all the thoughts and opinions expressed in this review are my own. I certainly will not be holding back, and I think that will become evidently very clear, because while this is a very good set, and I really do enjoy it and is one of my favorite mechs from the Monkey Kid line, I definitely think there's a lot of problems with it, and there's a lot of things that could be done a lot better in the way that it's presented. Especially because this is meant to be a successor to the original mech, the idea is that you would, well, build upon some of the shortcomings and fallbacks of that mech. But instead, they kind of just double down. There's a lot of very strange inclusions here in terms of the building techniques that just feel a little bit outdated, almost as if this set was, half of it was built a few years ago, and then they just kind of left it on this building table and came back and finished it with some newer parts. And that is the other thing. Aside from the new blade pieces right here, which you can see obviously these are new, as well as some of the weapon pieces for the minifigures, basically all of the pieces that are in this set are just existing parts, which is not a bad thing by any means. It's just kind of weird to open up a flagship set from a brand new year for LEGO where they typically introduce a few new pieces and just simply not see any. In fact, I don't really think there were really any recolors that were that notable in the set. Maybe the transparent red cockpit used for the detachable jet at the back, which we'll take a look at, but other than the minifigure stuff, there were no exclusive or new pieces for the year of 2023 that I was able to find in this set, which I thought was a little bit odd. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does kind of make the set feel like, again, part of it was built years ago and it is still using some older building techniques that are pretty much outdated now when it comes to LEGO mechs, whereas the rest of it was maybe built more recently and introduced some of the newer pieces. I'll explain that a little bit clearer as we go on. So of course this set features 6 brand new minifigures, and I will be saving our look at the minifigures for the end of the review. The focus here is of course on the mech itself, so while the minifigures are very cool, many of them exclusive to the set so that we know of so far, I just kind of want to pull the focus just on the mech itself. So taking it off the rotating platform here, let's just take a look at what the set has to offer by itself. So this is, again, $160 US, and pretty much the entire price of that goes just into the mech. Unlike many other Monkie Kid sets, which are kind of a double-edged sword here, it has no side builds. Now in the past, I have personally complained that a lot of times they will slap a massive price tag on a Monkie Kid set and just have it have one large build, but then a ton of other smaller stuff that I don't feel like we really needed. On the other side, though, it is really cool to get those smaller stuff, especially because a lot of times you can have different vehicles for the enemies, some civilian buildings, and I think the original Monkie Kid mech was the perfect example of this, coming with a mech as well as a pretty substantial side building to flesh out the background scenery, as well as a little miniature villain mech to oppose it, which I think was really charming. This, on the other hand, the entire price goes just into the mech itself, and while it certainly feels a little bit bulkier and more imposing than the original mech, I am very curious to see exactly how they stack up at the end of this video. But first, let's focus on the mech itself. So this mech, as some people were able to actually see, does actually have a transformation feature. A jet can actually be detached from the back of the model, which I think is a pretty cool feature, which we will showcase in a little bit. But as of right now, I want to start off with posability. So posability is interesting because for the legs here, unlike many of the newer LEGO mechs, especially with Ninjago, this unfortunately doesn't have knees. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I think that LEGO proved that you can give super large mechs knees last year with the Samurai X mech. I don't really know why they didn't use the exact same technique for this one because that was perfectly good. They literally used 3 different ball joints, but instead, the only movement that you can actually get out of these legs is this. And no, you cannot move them backwards. The legs are fixed at this angle forwards. You cannot really easily, realistically put it in a walking pose because this is the furthest it'll go backwards, and that's just kind of cheating a bit because the hinge is not meant to go back that far with the way that kind of bricks are built around to constrict it. You can really only just move the leg forwards. This is about as forwards as you can go, so I guess you can get a good kind of play pose with it kicking. But then that's it. The knees do not move, nothing else moves. You can kind of sway them one joint back and forth, so out here like this, and the feet can only basically rotate just like this. You can't really move the feet otherwise because they are super restricted here. Obviously this was for stability reasons, but as you can see, this is made just to make it super restrictive on the feet there, essentially such that you can really only move the feet from side to side. I really do hope that LEGO will one day actually be able to create either a stronger joint or a new building technique that actually allows you to have legs that can be posed for mechs of this size without just completely restricting the articulation like this. Now, they haven't really done it on super large mechs of this size, but I definitely know it is possible with LEGO bricks. They've literally done it before with Bionicle Titans and the Hero Factory Witch Doctor, which had a really cool system of feet. Actually, if I want to demonstrate, I have a sample model here that's kind of the perfect way to do feet. If you just look at the feet on this model here, you can rotate it side by side. It's on 2 ball joints, but then you can also bring it back to forth on 2 ball joints, and those are with friction, so that actually adds quite a lot of articulation. And that's pretty perfect. I mean, this is a great amount of articulation, and I just wish that LEGO would apply some of those same techniques to this particular set. See, the thing is, they've actually done it before. They've done it on some of their other Bionicle and Hero Factory sets, so I'm not really sure what's holding them back in terms of the articulation here. All in all, because of that, this feels a little bit more like a statue rather than an actual playable model, because the moment that you want to even put it into one click forwards of a walking pose, that's just going to fall over because it's just simply not going to have the feet be standing on the ground. In fact, this pose right here, this one that you can see with it standing, is probably the only walking or motion pose you're going to get out of this. It really just has to be standing, both feet planted on the ground, and you can't really do anything else. I mean, I guess you can maybe bring the legs in like that. Oh, no, that's gonna cause problems. Okay, maybe you can bring the legs in a little bit, but for the most part, this is basically the only pose you're going to get out of this model. Which isn't a bad thing if you just want to have it for display, but I think that sometimes LEGO kind of struggles to find the balance between building a model for playability as well as display and just being a good toy. A good toy to me is something that you can actually put in poses and you can actually bend and move around the limbs. But by just using this as a statue, yes, it is very easy for kids to just plop down. You don't really need to pose it too much. Plop it down, it stands up, that's great. One of the major complaints about LEGO's older mechs, like from Exoforce, was that you really had to mess with it in terms of moving the limbs and the joints and the legs to make them be able to stand. And so LEGO course corrected by now making their mechs like this, where a lot of their mechs just kind of act like statues. But I feel like they course corrected just a little bit too much, and I kind of miss the old days when you could still move around all the limbs and legs, and I still think there is a good compromise to be had between them. Whereas definitely in the older days of Exoforce and older LEGO mechs, they were absolutely a little bit too flimsy, or actually a lot too flimsy. Pieces would fall off, they were really hard to pose because you could bend all the limbs in pretty much any angle you wanted, but that didn't mean that they were easy to actually plant on the ground, whereas this feels like they overcorrected way too much and they addressed the problem, and now I think there's time to find a good middle ground, and Ninjago has been doing that with some of their mechs, namely the Zane's Titan mech and the recent Nia Samurai X mech, but this just feels like a bit of a step back into older LEGO territory. And one of the big reasons for that is the way that the legs are set up, in that the legs specifically use the older style of click joint, which was actually kind of made obsolete by a brand new click joint that introduced just this year in 2022, that instead of using kind of this longer Technic beam for the joint itself, they instead introduced a brand new piece, which funnily enough, you can literally see on the arms. This is the brand new joint, which actually uses the same amount of ratchet motion, except it confines it to a much more compact space. And then this right here is the longer style of joint, which does kind of limit the leg articulation because, again, you can't actually move the legs backwards. This is the furthest back it's going to go. Now, some would argue, and some would probably be right, that this was an intentional choice, because LEGO was worried that it's kind of back heavy. If you turn it to the side, there is this really large thing sticking out of the back. Maybe LEGO was worried that because of this whole build construction right here with a jetpack and the detachable jet, then it would just topple over backwards too easily if they didn't use this older joint. I guess, maybe that's why. The joint is pretty strong though. The ratchet joint is very strong. I am sure with playtesting, LEGO designers know what they're doing a lot more than me, but it just feels very strange to just simply not be able to bend the legs on this backwards. And the original Monkey Kid mech, which also had a pretty substantial back part, was able to bend its legs backwards. So not really sure what's the deal with that. Now, enough about the legs, let's now move on to kind of the upper part of the body itself. So I'm actually going to remove the weapon here for the articulation demonstration. It is a good weapon to actually have this kind of large-scale staff here, but it definitely makes posability really cumbersome. Now, one thing that is a bit of a downgrade here is that unfortunately the staff kind of acts as just its own staff and isn't actually connected by anything in terms of connection points. You have these axles which kind of slot into the staff itself, but obviously that's not an actual connection, that just kind of sits there, and you really just have to grip it with the fingers and hope it will stay in, which oftentimes when I was playing with it and trying to get into poses just caused it to fall out of this hand here because the fingers would open due to the weight of the staff itself. The original Monkey Kid mech had a slightly less good-looking staff because they had ball joint adapters in the middle here instead of the actual holes, but because of that they could attach it to ball joints in the hands itself, making it a lot easier for the weapon to be held. Then again, that being said, there are pros and cons because now the hands definitely look a lot more like hands without very obvious ball joints sticking out of it. So this is definitely a trade-off that I think some people will be okay with. I personally think it would have been just nicer and easier to be able to pose it a different way. Now, the articulation on the hands themselves are quite good in terms of the arms in general. You can bend it completely like this with the elbow here, so let me just kind of get this out. You can see you have the full range of motion right here for the elbow. The hand
hand is surprisingly on a mixel joint, which does offer some problems, but also allows it to really be able to be moved around in a completely crazy way. I kind of wish it was mounted on a standard ball joint just because this looks a little bit awkward with just how skinny that connection is. If you look at how skinny the hand connection is compared to everything else, that feels a little bit odd to me. The other thing that is odd is that when it's actually holding the staff, the hand will just kind of flop around to wherever the staff is going, resulting in some pretty awkward positioning because the mixel joint simply is not strong enough to hold up the weight of the staff, which is a little bit strange to me for a large-scale mech build. Now, the arms, thankfully, are using the wonderful new joint that was introduced just this year in 2022, making them very, very posable in terms of actually being able to move the arms around. You can pretty much have his arms all the way raised, which I think is really fantastic. Get this into some really fun poses, like raising his arms in victory, like, yeah, we got it, okay. Something like that. I think that is a really cool thing to have. And while it would have been nice to actually get a little bit more motion around the elbow rather than just back and forth, would have been cool to be able to rotate that. I think this is pretty much the best that you can get in terms of a large-scale mech like this. One thing I really like is that the shoulder armor is not fixed. It is completely held on by clips, which means that you can actually kind of move it inwards and outwards depending on how you actually want to set it up. I personally like the look of it when it's kind of inwards a little bit, but I definitely can see that there's a lot of really cool ways that you can set this up depending on how you want the look and feel of the silhouette of the mech to be, and that is a definite major improvement over the old one, which pretty much just had fixed shoulders. But moving upwards to the head. Now this is something I find kind of strange because, as you can see, you can't move it. The head only moves side to side. Huh, that is quite odd to me, especially because it would have been really, really easy to mount it on a mixel ball joint. You can only move it side to side. You cannot move it up and down unless you want to open the entire cockpit. You can't move it, kind of tilt it like this. You can only make it look back and forth. Why? I don't actually understand that. That is a very strange thing to me. Head articulation is one of the best ways to kind of give a model character. You can have it looking over to the side if it had articulation, looking up, looking down, but instead it just moves side to side, which is kind of baffling, and I really don't know why. Oh, actually, I think I do know why. You see, the head actually integrates a cool function in it. You can press a button on the back of the head, this one here, to actually make the eyes light up. Now this is quite an interesting feature because obviously the light kind of originates from the center of the actual brick because there aren't two lights there, there's just one in the center. Now they did try to make up for it by actually printing the Monkie mech eyes on a transparent yellow piece, which certainly helps a little bit, but then again, if you just look at it straight on, kind of like what I'm doing with the camera right now, it is very obvious there's just a little light in the center there, and some of the light does disperse the eyes, especially when it's kind of going on the side here. From the side, it looks all right. From the front, it just looks like a big old cylinder, kind of a single light just right down the center, which is a little odd. From the side, it looks okay though, and I appreciate the effort. One of the things I actually do like about the head is that a lot of times when LEGO tries to integrate a light brick like this, it ends up making the builds that they're built around feel very awkward in terms of just kind of not looking quite right, in terms of looking very blocky. But this head is actually really well done, and honestly, I wouldn't have even guessed there was a light brick hidden in there until I actually built it myself. That is a pretty good integration of the light brick, and I also think it's pretty cool how they actually have these vinyl pieces or kind of these metallic shiny elements on the top of the head here, which really just naturally curve backwards. That's a pretty cool look for the mech itself to have that be fully detailed. But because of this feature, I'm thinking that is exactly why LEGO did not mount the head on a ball joint and instead just has it on a swivel. Because kids, when they're pressing it on the back, oh no, you're going to make it look down, or they might accidentally knock the head off or make it look in the wrong direction. LEGO is very, very careful, and I think this is a perfect example of it. I think over careful in terms of making things playable for kids. In my opinion, if things were to maybe come off, it's alright because it's LEGO, you can just put them back on again. Obviously the legs really show that LEGO was kind of scared of this falling over for kids and kids not having a good play experience if it was falling over, so they really overcompensated and made it pretty much impossible to pose, but very easy to just plop down. And same goes for the head. Literally the only reason why I think that this is mounted on a swivel is because of this light up feature. Instead, because if it was on a ball joint, LEGO probably would have been worried that the head would be kind of hard for kids to be able to press that button. Maybe they would accidentally kind of push the head to be looking downwards if they pressed it. And to be honest, that is a little bit of a lame reason. I think that definitely is the reason why, but I certainly would have traded the light feature, which only kind of works from certain angles. From the front on, it looks very awkward. From the sides, it looks alright. I guess you can kind of see the light behind the eyes, and I think it's a good idea, but I certainly wish that you were actually able to pose the head instead of lighting it up. And if I could only choose one, I definitely would have gone for posability. Thankfully, though, it is Lego. And as you can see, this is literally just attached by a set of Technic beams. Just put a pin to Mixel ball joint connector there, and replace this axle with a Mixel ball joint receiver. Done. That is very, very easy. You can just very easily actually give it articulation if you want. I probably will be doing that actually once I finish the review. So that is something that is definitely super, super easy to modify should you actually want to. Now moving on to the back of the model, there are a couple of other things. It has these kind of cloud-like crowns around it. I'm not really sold on the shaping of these. These look a little bit weird. I don't think they're supposed to be wings. They really are supposed to evoke the Monkey Kid cloud feeling, but then they have some robotic detailing to it. Are they supposed to be flags? I don't really know. I'd have to see what that looks like in the eventual TV show when that comes out. But these thankfully are mounted on ball joints, so you can really just angle them however you want. They kind of are just decorative, but I think they add a little bit to the look and feel of the model. Definitely do kind of prefer the old flags that they used on the original Monkey Mech, but these are alright as well. And of course, this entire assembly on the back is a very obvious jet that can be detached, although they actually did a few cool things in terms of the way that this comes together and the way that certain parts click into it that actually was a little bit clever to me. And my favorite part of building this model was actually figuring out how the jet itself attached, because that all comes together in a really cool method. Obviously, some of the wings and blades of the jet you can see transform into a side blade weapon here, which I think is pretty cool for the mech itself to use in some alternate combat situations. Some of the wings are on the sides here, and we'll demonstrate that in a second. The guns also can be flipped up and down if you don't want to have the guns kind of up, which makes for a very, very fun and satisfying feature here. You can kind of have the guns up like this, the mech gets ready, gets into combat mode, and then boom, the guns flip down and it's ready for action. And these are actually spring-loaded shooters, so you can actually lower these pieces right here, and then out come these spring-loaded missiles. So the guns themselves, pretty cool. But we haven't shown off the coolest thing about the model yet, and one of my favorite things, and that is the detachable jet. So how does this work? Well, first of all, this weapon pops off right here, which is kind of this cool-looking blade weapon. I know I didn't talk a lot about the new molds for the blades. They're pretty cool. They fit in with Bionicle stuff, with a Monkey Kid flare with the clouds on it. I think they're pretty useful and better than some of the other large-scale blades that LEGO has come out with recently. Now moving on to the back here, you can now detach these pieces here, so these blades just come right off. And then you flip the guns upwards, like so, and this entire thing just kind of pops off the back. This whole separation thing right here just kind of separates from the back. It is held in very securely with not only 2 axles, but 2 clips as well. And then you're left with this as the mech itself. The back is actually still pretty detailed after having this be separated, which is really cool. I kind of like this better than without the jet attached on it, because this jet, as cool as it is, makes the back feel very clunky. And this just feels a little bit better to me, and maybe that was some of the shortcomings of the set. They really tried to factor in the jet itself being such a big draw to the set that they had to make some compromises along the way in terms of restricting articulation. But enough about the mech, let's put the mech aside and take a look at the jet itself. So how does this work? So this is actually really, really cool and interesting, because first of all, you actually kind of rotate these out, so these act as the engines of the jet. Now, this right here is very interesting because this is not actually attached fully. You just kind of remove the guns here, so these guns come off. This whole piece just flips down like so. So right here, this is the way the guns are supposed to be up, and then this just kind of flips down on the back, so making that fully seamless. You lift this up, and what's very cool is that this has a spot to attach the guns. So now you can attach the guns like this, and then this whole blade piece now sits on the inside of the jet itself. This comes down, and these blades, oh, there we go. These blades plug into the back of the guns here. So that is the complete look of the MK jet. Now, sometimes detachable builds from LEGO models, especially larger models, are a little bit hit or miss, I will say, and sometimes they feel very shoehorned in. This does not. This feels really good. I am very, very impressed that they took what was essentially the jetpack and the tail of the mech, the front guns and some of the blades, and essentially made it its own build. And this feels like it could have been its own side build to a different set, or maybe even its own set. This is a really cool way of kind of making these systems modular with each other. It's very easy to combine and kind of reminds me of the different builds that you got out of the Bone Demon mech. And that's one of my favorite things about the Monkie Kid line. Even though you're just buying one set, and even though I did complain that all of the $160 you're paying goes just into the mech itself, you're still getting a lot of value out of having this detachable build, which feels like a very substantial side build of the set itself. And yeah, if you take the mech again and put them side by side, this is great. This feels completely whole and completely good on its own, just like this, kind of by itself. Honestly, some would maybe argue that it's better without the jet. And then this feels like a fantastic large-scale side build, which really feels like you're getting two things in one box. So that is something that I think is very, very cool about this mech. I hope that LEGO will do more stuff like this in other themes. We got something like it in Ninjago with the Ultra Combo mech, but this just takes it to a different level, and is easily my favorite thing about the set. Still not worth $160 though, in my opinion. But with that, I think we've summed up my thoughts on the set. It's honestly a little bit of a mixed bag, and I feel really bad saying that because Monkie Kid has been one of my favorite original themes, and I still stand by the fact that Monkie Kid gets the best sets out of any LEGO original theme, pretty much bar none. I'm gonna be honest, I love Ninjago. Ninjago's story is pretty much unparalleled in this modern age of LEGO storytelling. Their sets don't come close to this. Even this, which I think is kind of an average mech and not really as good as some of the older ones, aside from a few standouts in Ninjago's waves, they never really get to this level of quality and detail. And again, the themes have two different budgets, and it's kind of hard to compare them, but just as a testament to how much detail and expertise just goes into developing these Monkie Kid sets, or even one that I spent a lot of this video complaining about being average, is still one of the best original theme sets that LEGO has currently available at their portfolio. So good on LEGO designers for doing that. Let's just give us a little bit better mech next time, because I think LEGO can do better than this. But with that, it's now time to take a look at the figures. Now, this was my first time actually interacting with the brand new minifigures of the wave, and I was incredibly excited to actually take a look at these because there's actually quite a lot to see here. So these are the minifigures of the Monkey King Ultra Mech. Now these are some very, very cool looking figures, and one of my favorite things about the set is that it includes 3 heroes and 3 villains, making it a pretty even fight character-wise if you don't count the build that comes with. Now, they also introduced a brand new weapons pack for 2023 for the MK sets. I believe this pack comes with every single one of the sets, but you can actually see some of the weapons here. Obviously, new pieces being used for the staff here, which are very good and actually look very realistic compared to the actual stuff. You also have a new sword being used for the Lion Demon villain here, and you also get a host of other types of weapons in the pack itself. On screen right now is, you can actually see a look at the pack, which is a very interesting thing to get for some of the legendary weapons from the kind of lore of the Journey to the West, so I think that is pretty cool to see. But returning to the minifigures themselves, these are a very interesting cohort of villain-like figures. One of the things that immediately strikes me about the villain figures in particular is that they are actually using rejected concepts from the development of LEGO Legends of Chima to form the way that the animal molds are done. One of the early development ideas for Chima was, instead of having kind of the large animal head molds, instead doing them in terms of beaks like that for the bird-like characters that kind of go around the necks, kind of pieces for the elephants that kind of just act kind of just around the necks themselves instead of head pieces like we eventually got, allowing more of the detailing on the face prints to show, and for the lions just simply kind of giving them hair. And I find it fascinating how those designs, which were rejected for Chima, are now finding their way into Monkie Kid years and years later. Actually, oh my goodness, it has been 10 years since Chima debuted. That is pretty crazy to me. But yeah, 10 years since 2013, these old concepts are actually being used in LEGO form. I don't know if they ever consulted some of their old molds and details for that, but I think it's pretty cool to see some older LEGO designs still get reused in LEGO form today. Now, one thing about the Monkie Kid figures, which is pretty much a constant throughout all of them, is that they are very deluxe. As you can see, there's printing on the sides of the legs for some of them. There's some excellent detailing being used for the characters themselves, very intricate details, new molds being introduced. I actually count 4 brand new molds for the figures here. You've got the elephant mold, the lion head mold, the beak for the vulture here, and of course Mr. Tang's new crown, which brings him a lot closer to his depiction in the original Journey to the West legend. And of course you have a lot of recolors from the golden wings from LEGO Video, which are going to be very useful for LEGO Ninjago, a brand new cut of dual-sided cloth, black and purple for the main lion villain there, and of course all sorts of different unique accessories for the figures themselves. However, I do have some things that I feel like could have been improved about the figures, and let's just kind of go one by one here, starting off with the Monkey King himself. So MK, or Monkey King, here gets a completely radically new outfit, which I think is very interesting to see. It's kind of more of a savage or tribal jungle-like outfit than he's had before, which were a lot more regal, and I'm very curious to see where this actually plays into the story. But setting aside his staff, which is kind of a little bit unwieldy, it is a lot larger than the original staff, I do have to say I love the way that these pieces are done, love the detailing on the end of the staff itself. That is very cool. I love that LEGO actually made the specialized accessory for this. But looking at the minifigure, one thing I find very strange is that in the past, a lot of the Monkey Kid figures have had dual molding for the legs. Although unfortunately, when you actually move it to the side, these are not dual molded, and it feels very strange to me that this was pretty much the perfect time to do dual molding. It literally has a cutoff between kind of this keyed orange or flame yellowish orange color for the top, continuing around to the side, and they actually have that printed there, and then just not have them dual molded, which is very odd to me and feels more like a budget issue than anything, which is quite interesting because Monkey Kid hasn't really suffered from budget issues before. Still, here I am complaining about budget issues when the figure has fantastic leg printing, so it's not really all bad. It is still a fantastic figure, just a little baffling because this would have been the perfect time to introduce leg printing for the characters. And speaking of, looking at Mr. Tang here, yeah, where is the dual molded legs here? It's very odd that he doesn't have dual molded legs. It would have again been the perfect time to have dual molded legs. Instead he has leg printing, which continues the printing of the tan here and the dark red here, and then it abruptly cuts off when you go to the back. So it again feels like some of the early days of collectible minifigures when they were not actually having the technology to do leg printing, and instead were forced to kind of contend with just printing some of the alternating colors on the sides. It just feels odd to me how that isn't actually factored into the figure itself. Still, the rest of the figure is really nice. I love the brand new kind of metallic head sculpt they've given him, and he does actually have a brand new face for the Mr. Tang character, where he has kind of this annoyed or eyes closed expression, which is really good, fits in with the animation, and then this kind of angry or more determined expression on the front here, which I think is very cool. Monkey King also has 2 different expressions here. He has kind of a happier one, as well as one where he's just crying, which is a really interesting expression to have. I feel bad for him. Look at the poor guy. He's just... You can see the tears coming out of his eyes there. That is a very funny looking expression, and I'm really curious to see how exactly that plays into the TV show. Literally giving one of the main heroes a crying expression is quite interesting, but I'm very curious to see what happens with that. Now, MK himself, the kind of main attraction for the set, is very, very interesting to see. He has some phenomenal, and I mean phenomenal, detail for his armor. That is some really great detailing. I love the way that this looks. He is just using kind of a face that we actually, I don't think we've seen this exact one before. Maybe we have. I've lost track of all the MK faces. It certainly looks familiar, so maybe this is one we've seen before. But he actually does introduce this kind of armor piece in gray for the first time, and interestingly enough, his entire torso is metallic silver, which really does make the figure feel a lot more special. I kind of wish that they recolored this armor in metallic silver as well. I think that would have been really cool, and also done the hands in silver. Not sure if they can do the hands in silver. They might have done that before and I've forgotten. But this is still not a bad figure by any means, and I love the amount of detailing on the armor for the torso itself. That is just some of the best amount of layers and detailing and shiny kind of hidden metallic prints that we've seen from LEGO in a long time. So well done on the MK figures, pretty much as usual. In terms of the villains, we've got kind of this lion demon here. His cape is the standout, being a brand new cut, purple on one side and black on the other. That doesn't mean he doesn't have excellent printing on the back there. One of the things I really find interesting is that a lot of the villain figures of this wave specifically have kind of this corruption being showcased, where they have this corrupted side bleeding into one of their arms. So you can see here that you've got some purple and black corruption. This is a standard teal arm, and then this is kind of the evil side of him, which is very cool. Now he does actually have some specialized alternate expressions, which you can see right here, one more ferocious and one kind of more standard. And what's interesting is that the blade element is very similar to a blade that we actually got in a Ninjago weapons pack. It is slightly modified and now has a hole in the center, kind of a molding hole, which is interesting to see here. I believe the candle is also recolored in black here, which is very cool to see, and the villains are some of the coolest MK villains we've gotten so far. This kind of bird-like demon here is another great one. He is actually reusing one of the tassel pieces introduced in LEGO City Stunts just this year, but of course the beak is all new. Now, the unfortunate side effect is that the beak can kind of swivel around the head, so if you're not really careful with it, it does tend to look a little bit awkward, but I love the way that they actually molded the beak, and it's really cool, again, seeing what could have been in terms of a Chima-like character. The weapon itself is very simple, just kind of a spike on a spear, but it's not bad, and I do like the overall detailing of the figure itself. The gold wings absolutely being the highlight of the figure here. But far and away my favorite villain here is this one. This is the Elephant Demon villain, and that is just such a fun character to get. Now, we've had elephants, or I guess mammoth figures before in Chima, but this just takes it to a different level by actually having this entire piece being something that kind of sits around the head itself. He is just reusing the hairpiece introduced for some of the spider villains, but that's not a problem. That absolutely fits the character itself, and I love that his weapons are recolored pumpkins to act as his clubs. That is a perfect weapon for an elephant villain, and I think this is one of my favorite villains and one of the favorite characters to come out of Monkey Kid in a long time. It's a long way until December of 2023, but if this quality keeps up, this may be actually on my list for the best figures of 2023, because this is easily one of the coolest looking ones in particular, especially with that fantastic new kind of dual color sculpt being introduced. It's a little bit rubberized, it has some painted detail to it, but all in all, this is probably my favorite figure from the set. It's just such a fun and charming character to have an elephant villain being featured, and I can't wait to get the set that actually is dedicated to just him. All in all, the figure selection for the set is definitely a lot better than the original Monkey Kid mech, which is absolutely one of the things I do want to point out. The figure selection is very, very good, and while there are some strange things, like I don't know why Tang and Monkey King don't have dual molded legs other than just budget, which feels odd because they have printing on the side of the legs anyway, I still think this is one of the absolute standout figure selections. Getting pretty much all of the main villains of the wave in one set is really cool. Good on LEGO for doing that and not making you kind of split up and buy each of the individual sets just to get each one of the main villains, and getting a lot of the core cast in terms of MK, Monkey King, and Tang himself is really kind of what makes this special compared to many of the other sets. But with that, we have summed up our look at the Monkey King Ultra Mech.
Alright, and with that, we have summed up our review of 80045, the Monkey King Ultra Mech. Definitely one of the more interesting sets, how it basically is a direct successor to one of the older Monkey Kid sets. It kind of reminds me of the Ninjago Destiny's Bounties to an extent, in that LEGO will, after a few years, produce an updated version of one of the classic and most favorite models from the original theme. So it's kind of cool how we are getting a newer version of this about 2 to 3 years after we got the first one. Certainly is an interesting choice by LEGO, and again, there are a lot of similarities here, although there are a lot of differences as well. And as you saw in the review, my thoughts on it are kind of mixed in terms of how necessary it is to get if you are a fan of Monkey Kid but already have the original mech. But of course, these are just my thoughts. I am very interested in hearing yours, so let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of this build? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Do you think it's worth getting over the original one? Or do you think the original one is better, both in terms of value and the build itself? That's all for today. Thank you all so much for tuning into DuckBricks. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and stay tuned because on a regular basis I will be putting out reviews of the entire January 2023 LEGO Monkey Kid line. I hope you've been enjoying, and be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thanks so much, and bye for now.